Hi, I'm Lydia Cardell. Alison Pujol.
And I'm Sofia Pereira.
And you're watching Crash Course Romantic Literature!
Back in the 1700s, a great movement started. It was the movement to end all movements.
Allison, we are talking about Romanticism, right?
Oh, I love Romanticism. It's an idea that stresses emotional connections and forming a new mindset.
Yes, it's basically all the touchy, the feely, and the emotional aspects all put together.
It is combining the beauty of nature and human feeling, like compassion, freedom, and rebellion.
Romanticism can be classified as having 5 parts. The first is that it uses simple and direct language, basically colloquial diction. The second is that it uses spontaneous and creative work in art. The third is that it uses nature to develop a deeper self-awareness. The fourth is that it encompasses abstract ideas but into a simple and concrete manner. And the fifth is that it places a high value on individual achievements.
Oh, hi. Didn't see you there. Romanticism was first created by the Romantic poet William Wordsworth in the Lake District, a place he described in a religious way where he embarked on a journey of self-discovery.
The idea for Romanticism came as a reaction to the ideals of the Enlightenment, the French Revolution, and industrialization. Romantic poets often supported the nonviolent aspect of the French Revolution because its ideals encompassed fighting for freedom and changing society for the better.
Romantics could be painters, philosophers, and poets. The 6 most well-known authors are William Blake, William Wordsworth, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, George Gordon, Percy Shelley, and John Keats. One Romantic poet, Lord Byron, created the idea of a romantic hero or a Byronic hero. This type of hero is similar to the regular romantic hero. However, they are characterized as being smart, arrogant, emotional, reckless, and often very appealing.
I love John. He always keeps the literature flowing.
Oh, Allison, let's go to the thought bubble.
Guys, the thought bubble's that way.
Alright, so today I'm going to be talking to you guys about a very influential English Romantic poet named Percy Shelley. He was a true visionary and is regarded by some critics as one of the finest lyric poets in the English language. Percy Bysshe Shelley was born August 4th, 1792, in Horsham, England. He was the first of 7 children born to Elizabeth Shelley and her husband, a member of the Parliament named Sir Timothy Shelley. As the son of a member of Parliament who stood to inherit a sizable income, Shelley attended only the best schools, and in 1804, at the age of 12, he went off to Eton College, the boys' boarding school. He was teased mercilessly, however, and in 1810, Shelley enrolled at Oxford. Within the year, he had published his first novel and a book of vulgar poetry, which nearly got him expelled. Shelley managed to finish that job by the end of his first year with the publication of an essay entitled The Necessity of Atheism. To say his father was furious was an understatement. 4 months after being expelled on August 28, 1811, Shelley ran off to Scotland to marry a 16-year-old named Harriet Westbrook, a pupil at the same boarding school as his sister, whom his father had forbidden him from seeing. In reality, Shelley knew that he was not in love with Harriet, but at the time, he thought of marriage as a sort of social experiment. Shelley's father, who was outraged that his son had married beneath him, revoked Shelley's allowance and refused to ever receive the couple at his house. After a while, however, Shelley fell in love with a different woman, Mary Godwin, and they ran away together in pursuit of making the world a more free, true, and beautiful place. Mary later went on to write Frankenstein. Upon his return to England, Shelley heard news about Harriet, his first wife's, suicide. His grief and guilt helped to inspire many of his poems. In 1822, Shortly after his works were published, Shelley drowned at sea at the age of 29 during a sailing trip. Despite his short life, however, Shelley was still able to use his experiences as an outcast to successfully tell his story of his personal relationship with nature through his magnificent poetry.
Well, Shelley's life definitely impacted his work. He was expelled from school for simply writing about his beliefs.
Well, that, and he was married to the author of Frankenstein. If I had to take a guess, it was probably a monstrous marriage.
Now let's discuss Shelley's poetry.
So, To a Skylark by Percy Shelley. So, we're going to talk about the purpose of the poem first. So, the narrator is longing for happiness that this skylark, or this bird, represents. The skylark is a vehicle to illustrate all the different beautiful aspects of life, like the experience of joy and lack of restraint, and also shows the narrator's connection to nature. So the meaning of the poem is to evoke an appreciation of nature through the skylark song, and also illustrate man's existence, and shows through opposition the narrator's distance and yet closeness to nature that the song represents. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the structure of this poem. So the poem is divided into stanzas, right? With 5 lines each. The first 4 lines are trochaic, and the last one is an iambic hexameter. So this one, for example, is an iambic hexameter. So the poem is an ode to a skylark, which is a bird. The trochaic and iambic lines show this ode to sound very melodic and almost sound-like, and pretty much like a ballad. This very flowy structure makes the poem sound a bit like a song, which shows how emotional our author here and the narrator is, which is important later on when we get into apostrophes and rhetorical questions. So now we're going to talk about point of view of the poem and attitude. So the narrator, who's really into the touchy-feely emotions, uses all first, second, and third person to show his attitude towards nature and also his distance and closeness to it. So when he uses first person, for example, it's to connect to humanity and to his own race, and uses words like we and us to describe humanity, such as in this line 86, we look before and after and pine for what is not, where he's describing humanity's faults and how humanity is subject to fears that the skylark isn't. So when he uses first person, it's to connect to humanity. When he uses second person, he's connecting and apostrophizing the bird, which shows heightened emotion. For example, in the first line, hail to thee, blithe spirit. Now, the second person almost seems like the skylark is distant from the author, and Shelley's calling it out. So it's to establish a connection to the bird, but also to show distance from it, and show that humans are very different from birds, because humans can be subject to pain and all the bad parts of life that the skylarks don't have to be part of. So for the rest of the poem, when he uses third person, it's really just talking about nature and connecting to beauty by talking about how he's awestruck by all its glory. For example, when he compares the skylark to a poet, a highborn maiden, and a glowworm golden, and a rose, he's using third person, but it's just to paint a picture of how beautiful nature is and how glorious all of it is, and really just establish why he's talking about it. So now we're going to talk about literary devices that Shelley uses to convey the meaning of the poem. So definitely what's really important is there's a huge use of rhetorical questions and apostrophe, which are both used to show the heightened emotions of the narrator. So a really good use of this is in lines 71 through 75, where Shelley asks, kind of frantically, what objects are the fountains of thy happy strain? What fields or waves or mountains? What shapes of sky or plain? What love of thine own kind? What ignorance or pain? So when you look at these rhetorical questions, you have to notice that beyond the narrator's obvious emotional pleading with the bird, his language shifts from concrete imagery, for example, the fountains, the mountains, the plain, the sky, to these romantic and pretty abstract concepts such as love and ignorance. This can be used to show the author's closeness to the bird, and yet the gradual shift to the distance he feels from it as a member of the human race, who feels pain and cries and longs for the peace and joy that the bird feels. So apart from rhetorical questions and the apostrophe, there's also a lot of imagery using light and sometimes in opposition with darkness. So this is used to illustrate the tone, which is longing and desperate to enjoy happiness. So for example, in lines 11 and 12, he shows in the golden lightning of the sunken sun, which shows light. Then we have 18 and 19 over here, which says, like a star of heaven in the broad daylight. Then a really ironic one on line 13 is, over which clouds are brightening, which is really a strange word choice and a pretty good pick, because usually you don't say clouds are brightening, usually you say they're darkening, which means that there's some emotional shift that's happening in that line. Also, we say that when the night is bare from one lonely cloud, the moon rains out her beams, and that's in 28 and 30 over here. So he's using night in opposition with the moon and heaven. So the moon is the light, and the night is the darkness. So this shows an emotional significance, because when he's using the night in such stark opposition with the moon, it really makes the light and the heaven imagery really stand out, and makes the beauty that the bird gives to his life and gives him meaning, it makes that really stand out too. So that was a really effective use of imagery. So this also shows the meaning of the poem and the tone, as well as an ode to this creature that brings light and salvation to Shelley's journey to make the world more free, true, and beautiful. As you can see from such stark uses of imagery that really make his tone seem more longing, as you can see from blatant apostrophe over here, in different forms of similes. So there's also a shift on line 86 where he says, we look before and after and pine for what is not. So we would say this is a shift because it shifts from illustrating what nature is like to all of a sudden showing what humanity is like, and all of a sudden talking about all the sadness that they have to endure that the skylark doesn't. So this is also, you can also see this from the oxymoron in the passage, such as harmonious madness in the third to last line here. This illustrates opposition in the poem and paints a picture of the opposition found in nature as well as in Shelley's own life that he would want to overcome by modeling the freedom and the joy that the bird feels.
Now we're going to discuss some other questions for the readers to analyze. The first is, what other imagery and word choices do you think help to emphasize Shelley's overall message? The second is, what do you think are some of the similarities of the human and the bird's lives that Shelley addresses throughout his poem? The third is, what devices does Shelley use to illustrate these similarities?